the wealthy CEO said it once, her voice sharp, cold, and utterly dismissing his worth. "Stay out of my life." He did not even try to argue. He just grabbed his tools and walked out of that massive boardroom, leaving 8 stunned executives watching in silence. Down in the parking garage, his 6-year-old daughter waited. She was clutching her faded toy rabbit tightly, the way a child holds onto the only thing they have left. He had zero patience for an arrogant CEO who treated him like he was absolutely invisible. But exactly 3 weeks later, Giselle was standing right outside his small apartment door at 11 o'clock at night. Tears ran down her face, her hands shaking with deep regret. You and I have to wonder what breaks a powerful woman enough to beg the man she discarded. The day began just like all of Liam's mornings did, completely quiet. He moved with a calm grace that high society snobs never bothered to notice. At 29, he carried a heavy, guarded stillness that only comes from deep loss. Not because his life was empty, but because he carried every heavy burden alone. By 7 a.m., he was kneeling in the tight hallway of their home. In their third-floor Brooklyn apartment, tying his daughter's shoes as she held her toy. That old stuffed rabbit with the torn ear and a missing eye. She held it flat against her chest, using the worn toy like a little emotional shield. Little Arya had her mother's eyes, wide, deeply honest, and completely vulnerable to the world. The exact kind of soft eyes that notice things arrogant people choose to ignore. She looked down at him, asking the very same question she asked every single morning. She had asked it for 300 days straight, never missing a beat. Would he be there to pick her up later? He gently promised her he would. He always said yes, and he had never broken that promise to her. Their tiny place was organized with the deep care of a man who valued small things. A massive wooden bookshelf lined one of their living room walls. And those books were organized not by title or author's name, but in a genius system you and I could only appreciate if we saw inside his mind. Sitting right on his desk corner was a thick journal filled with complex equations and formulas he had written out himself. The blue ink was slightly smudged from the side of his left hand. Little Arya always called it his difficult book. When she asked about the numbers, he told her it was just a hard puzzle he wanted to finish. She believed him completely, with that pure innocent faith kids have that never demands proof. He put on the dark blue uniform of the company's low-level maintenance crew. The corporate logo was stitched in yellow thread right on his collar. He had been working there, quietly fixing their problems for 14 months. Not a single wealthy executive knew his brilliant history, and he never gave them a clue. No one bothered to ask him anyway, and his past did not matter anymore. Just 3 years ago, Liam was a high-level executive at a massive Manhattan firm. It was the kind of office where status was everything, and coffee cost a fortune. The work was incredibly intense, demanding nothing less than his absolute genius every single day. He was brilliant at his job, genuinely exceptional to be honest. He had that deep confidence that never needed validation from empty corporate crowds. Let's see how fate can blindside you, taking away everything you worked so hard to build. Grief ignores all logic, stripping away the very people who make heartbreak bearable. Claire was taken from him on a freezing November Tuesday on the expressway. She was simply making a routine, everyday left turn when everything shattered. Claire was heading home from work, while sweet little Arya waited with the babysitter. Liam was trapped in a crucial corporate meeting when his phone started ringing endlessly. Within days, he walked away and handed in his resignation. You see, that cutthroat executive world meant absolutely nothing compared to what he lost. All that mattered was his little girl, who desperately needed her father to soothe her nightmares. And Scout was her last comfort. A precious stuffed dog Claire bought her just weeks before the fatal crash. The little girl hadn't let go of it since they buried her mother. Every morning, Liam watched his fragile daughter walk through those cold school doors. Those bright yellow doors, with Scout tucked safely inside her small backpack. Her kind teachers gently allowed her to keep the toy close during class. They recognized the raw grief of a motherless child holding on to the only comfort she had left. Now Liam rode the quiet bus to Weston Capitol. He rode the service elevator straight down to the mechanical floor. Starting his humble maintenance shift, a quiet life the wealthy executives upstairs completely ignored. Yet he thrived in this blue-collar work, finding value they could never understand. Calm and methodical, he fixed complex systems with a quiet brilliance no manual teaches. His supervisor even joked that his sharp mind was completely wasted on simple maintenance. He just smiled, said thanks, and went back to fixing the massive cooling units. Directly 22 floors above his head. Let's look at Giselle Weston. She stood by her penthouse glass, unaware that her drive for success was about to cost her everything. At just 28 years old, she had ruthlessly run Weston Capital as CEO for 2 grueling, intense years. Ever since her strict father, Harold, suffered a stroke that forced him out of his daily leadership, though he could still watch her. Watch her coldly during board meetings, wearing a heavy expression she chose to completely ignore. This entire corporate empire was his masterwork, but he didn't hand her the crown out of simple convenience. 3 bitter, greedy executives fully expected to steal that coveted chair, and they didn't bother to hide their deep fury. He chose her because she was the perfect leader, and the proud old man's sharp business instincts were rarely wrong. But those directors lacked his vision. You and I know how vultures watch a falling tightrope walker. They smile politely, paying close attention, ready to strike the moment her balance finally slips. This massive merger with the Harland Group was meant to silence her doubters once and for all. $340 million, the biggest transaction in company history. Her big signing ceremony was locked in for 9 a.m. tomorrow. 6 grueling months of negotiation and 2 brutal rounds of due diligence, along with a flawless final audit that Xavier Monroe just handed to the board 2 days ago, delivered with his signature quiet efficiency. Xavier, the brilliant 43-year-old CFO, had guarded this company's secrets since before Giselle even started high school. Her father trusted him completely, never doubting his loyalty. Sometimes you only value someone after you've pushed them away. The one person who stood by you through every crisis without ever complaining. I inherited that blind trust in him the exact same way I inherited this desk, the corner office, and the 64-year history of this firm without ever questioning it. Because back then there was never a single reason to. My father showed up every morning with answers to questions I hadn't even finished asking. His reliability was my anchor, but I took it for granted, never once checking the chain myself. Then came the morning that shattered our relationship completely. My father was called to the 22nd floor to check the conference room's server cooling unit. A simple cooling loop, running parallel to the main trading system, wired straight to the transaction logs down below. Just a completely routine job. The kind scheduled every 6 weeks, usually taking less than an hour. But my little sister Arya's school called at 7:45. She had caught a bug. The daycare was short-staffed, and my little sister Arya needed to be picked up before noon if my father couldn't find another option. My father called 3 different people over the next 20 minutes. Nobody answered. He called the school back and told them the truth. With no backup plan, he faced a tight deadline before my 10 o'clock board meeting. So he brought my sister along. He warned her twice on the drive, using that gentle tone he reserved for when things actually mattered, telling her to sit in the hallway chair right outside the conference room, not move, make no sound, and definitely not go inside. Arya lasted 11 minutes. She honestly wasn't trying to cause any trouble. She had simply never seen a room with massive floor-to-ceiling windows and a gorgeous city view. That sweeping view pulled her in, like gravity pulls innocent kids who haven't learned to fight back. She brought her toy. She sat down cross-legged on the carpet right beside my father's toolbox, making no sound, trying so incredibly hard to remain completely invisible. My investors walked in at 9:58, 12 of them, pushing through the glass doors with that cold, ruthless focus that millions of dollars always breeds. I entered last, freezing when I saw my little sister sitting on the floor. I looked at the child, then at my father in his blue uniform crouching by the servers, then back at the board members right behind me, staring at the exact same scene. My father stood up. He clearly stated his name. He explained everything without making excuses. The sick teacher, the ruined backup plans, the strict work order, promising that my sister hadn't touched a single thing and wouldn't. His voice stayed level. He didn't beg his own daughter for mercy or fake remorse. He simply gave me the honest truth about what happened. I barely listened before my corporate pride made the worst decision of my life. "This is not a daycare," I snapped. My voice was perfectly controlled, brutally professional, and 15 degrees colder than the room. "I need you both to leave," my father just nodded. He started packing his tools, closing the case with that same quiet, methodical care he always showed. Before closing it, he gave me a look that still haunts me, complete emotional distance. He offered her the exact salvation she desperately needed, but her pride blinded her to his value. "The cooling loop on the backup server has a tiny pressure leak," the humble mechanic explained. "It is minor, but pressure has been building for a whole week. If you ignore this warning before the workday ends, you might see massive failures in the transaction logs during peak afternoon trading." The ungrateful CEO glared coldly, completely blind to her father's immense worth, a look reserved for those she deemed beneath her high-stakes corporate world. "We have a tech department," she coldly snapped. "This is not your problem." We both know her type. An arrogant board member scoffed, letting out a mocking laugh, utterly blind to the genius standing right there. It was clear, pure mockery. Beside him, his little girl Arya looked up, whispering softly through her heartbreak, asking if those rich people hated her daddy. He stayed completely silent. The dismissed father gently stroked his daughter's hair, quietly guiding her toward the heavy corporate exit. Giselle threw a final prideful dagger, discarding her father forever. "Stay out of my life." Cold, absolute, and drenched in the arrogance of a CEO who would soon regret pushing away her greatest asset. Liam paused for 1 second. Then he walked away holding his daughter's hand, keeping his shoulders proudly squared, despite her bitter rejection. That evening, Liam lovingly cooked dinner, keeping up their simple Tuesday night family tradition. Little Arya perched right on the worn kitchen counter, just like she always did. With her toy propped against the flour jar, they shared a quiet, warm bond discussing her day. Drifting through happy, scattered stories, letting their warm conversation flow naturally. She innocently asked why her favorite doll was named Scout. He had shared this memory before, but she craved the comforting rhythm of his voice, so he repeated it softly. Her mother Claire chose it. Claire believed Arya had a special gift for discovering the quiet magic hidden from the rest of the world. Because a scout watches the horizon before anyone else notices, making the beautiful name fit her completely. Arya pondered this deep thought with the quiet seriousness she applied to everything important. Then she curiously asked if Scout could actually uncover secrets. Liam gently smiled, explaining that it entirely depended on who held him. "Stick with me here." Once she slept, he opened his laptop to secretly craft the brilliant risk analysis software he had spent 2 years building. A powerful tool forged in the quiet hours past midnight. Built piece by careful piece. Crafted entirely alone, without corporate timelines or wealthy investors breathing down his tired neck. Yet before launching his own project, he paused, his mind drifting back 3 weeks to that day he was summoned up to Giselle's 22nd floor. The server maintenance had seemed totally routine. A careless technician had vanished, leaving the highly classified configuration display fully exposed right there on the main terminal screen. The honest mechanic never intended to snoop, but a hidden timestamp buried inside the deep encryption layer snagged his immediate focus. The exact way significant numbers grab a brilliant mind without any warning at all. It was an emotional date he could never simply ignore. March 14th, 2021, his sweet daughter's birthday. He easily spotted the fatal security flaw, but she had already pushed her only protector away. You see, he possessed the rare genius she threw away, having spent 14 months mastering this exact algorithm. It was a time-stamped encryption setup, highly specific, totally obscure, only detailed in a 2019 academic paper one my father actually co-authored. This was no basic corporate software. You couldn't just buy this kind of security program anywhere. It was the kind of complex code that stayed buried in academic journals, used only by a rare expert who understood the theory. My father kept his mouth completely shut. He just finished the simple HVAC inspection I originally hired him to do. He did his job, signed the service ticket, and quietly walked out. My corporate empire wasn't his world, and I made that brutally clear. He tried to forget the whole thing. Then 3 weeks passed. Weston Capital entered the final audit stage before our massive merger. Xavier Monroe handed over the financial files with that slick confidence of a man who knew exactly how to play the corporate game. Until a junior auditor caught the issue. A 26-year-old named Casey. She had been with my company just 7 months, but she was sharp enough to spot a tiny fatal flaw in the numbers. A 0.003% gap in quarterly records. Just one single line that refused to match up with the rest. $400,000. Honestly, pocket change against our $340 million deal. It was the sort of small number most people just write off. They usually blame computer timing, and nobody asks any questions. But Casey didn't let it slide. She flagged the report and handed it straight to Diana. Diana brought it right to my desk, and I immediately told my IT team to pull the logs. My team came back with an update I was completely unprepared to hear. The exact files we needed were locked behind an encryption format they had never seen before. Our expensive enterprise software couldn't even put a dent in it. They needed 48 hours and outside help just to crack it. Stay with me here. I stared at the clock. The signing was at 9 a.m. tomorrow. 48 hours was 39 hours too late. Desperate, I called 3 cybersecurity firms. Every single one told me 72 hours minimum. None of them recognized the strange code structure. Xavier strolled into my office at 9, looking perfectly calm, holding his phone and a fresh glass of water. He had that infuriating arrogance of a man who already controlled exactly how our conversation would end. He swore to me it was just a routine glitch. Claimed these minor hiccups popped up during any major financial audit. He promised my IT guys would break the lock with plenty of time to spare. He told me to stop letting a tiny data flaw threaten a massive business deal. He spoke just long enough to sound reassuring, avoiding a single technically false statement. When he finally finished, I quietly thanked him, and he just left. I sat alone in my quiet office, fighting a heavy, sinking feeling I couldn't quite define. He was way too fast to comfort me, the way he just waltzed right in. He already knew my exact fears, and conveniently had the perfect answer ready. I forced the doubt away. Xavier was my late father's trusted anchor for 15 years. You and I both know you don't cut an anchor loose unless you know what's dragging below. By 10:30, things looked much worse. A 4th security firm repeated the exact same brutal timeline. That encryption code, it didn't exist in any database my company owned. My tech team could bypass it, sure, but they needed 3 whole days. Staring out my corner office window at the skyline, the truth finally hit me. You know that brutal midnight clarity, when everyone's gone, and nobody can sugarcoat reality. I was staring down a tech crisis I couldn't fix with my current team. If I signed that merger tomorrow morning without clearing up this massive anomaly, I'd be bringing blind, unmeasured risk into a massive acquisition that couldn't survive it. But if I didn't sign, 6 brutal months of negotiations collapsed instantly. My board of directors would finally have the ammunition they'd stockpiled since my first day. And Harlan Group would simply walk away and choose a competitor. Someone without massive, unexplained black holes tearing through their transaction records. Diana knocked and barged right into my office. She had that quiet boldness earned from 2 years of working late nights. She sat down in silence. Then she quietly admitted she'd been struggling to remember something. And then it hit her, the quiet mechanic. My father in our boardroom 3 weeks ago. His warning about our transaction logs. The exact words he said before my stubborn pride flared and I cut him off. Diana had been hiding in the corner that day, scribbling on her notepad. She wrote his warning down word for word, never trying to filter out what seemed unimportant. Because she always did. You and I both know we only realize a person's value after pushing them out of our lives. She opened her notes, found the exact entry, and read his warning aloud. The cooling loop on the backup server unit has a critical pressure leak. Ignore this today, and you'll suffer major data disruptions in your transaction history during peak trading hours. She repeated it twice. I sat back, letting the harsh truth sink in. I finally spoke. Find me his personnel file. My father's human resources document told me absolutely nothing useful. Just his name, home address, maintenance department, 14 months of service, and 0 warnings. Diana leaned over my shoulder, opened a browser, and searched his full name without me even asking. The top result, a 2020 academic paper from a highly respected computational finance journal. The exact kind of heavy research publication that only 3 groups ever bother reading. Stressed graduate students, their demanding professors, and a tiny sliver of elite finance professionals who actually care about the math behind algorithms. The title of the paper. It featured a specific tech phrase I instantly recognized from the IT crisis report sent 3 hours ago. I quickly scanned the abstract. The second author credited was Liam R. Ashford, Columbia University. I read my father's name again, much slower. My heart, which I'd spent 2 years training to stay totally numb during corporate crises, started racing out of control. I checked the time, 10:47 p.m. The corporate signing was exactly 10 hours and 13 minutes away. I stared at my father's residential address, then slowly looked at Diana. Diana stayed completely silent, which was its own unspoken command. I grabbed my car keys straight out of the desk drawer and threw on my coat, marching to the elevator without even changing out of my heels. I didn't grab a bag, just that folded piece of paper with his address and a desperation I'd been far too proud to admit feeling 48 hours earlier. I drove myself tonight. I hadn't been behind the wheel alone in 2 years, and the sudden familiarity of it was jarring. My hands gripped the wheel as the city blurred past, completely indifferent to my control. It felt grounding, right until the crushing realization of where I was heading finally sank in. Liam's apartment building was narrow and old. A cheap 4-story walk-up in Brooklyn, miles from the exclusive neighborhoods where I spent my life. I climbed 3 grueling flights of stairs in expensive heels, never meant for this kind of humbling journey. I stood outside apartment 314, took a breath, and knocked. My expensive corporate armor had completely shattered. I wasn't wearing my polished, powerful CEO mask tonight. I was just a broken woman who had run out of options, painfully feeling the weight of my arrogance. Then the heavy door opened. Liam stared at me with that same quiet dignity I had so foolishly dismissed weeks ago. Watchful, unhurried, and completely unintimidated by my wealth or empty power. Or the shameful fact that I had cruelly discarded him in front of my board 3 weeks ago. He wore a faded shirt, and I saw a worn-out notebook resting on the table behind him. The air smelled of clean soap and a warm, inviting feeling that was the undeniable soft atmosphere of a home where a loved child lived. He studied me, then glanced past my shoulder into the dark hallway to make sure I was alone. I was alone. He looked back at me, waiting silently until I softly whispered his name. My voice cracked slightly as I spoke. There was no theatrical drama. I would never have let myself look this vulnerable if I had any other choice left. It was a crack in my polished shield, the kind that breaks when you try to hold everything together alone. I need your help, I admitted, but he didn't offer any easy reassurance. He didn't step back or hold the door open for me. He just watched me, asking, "What kind?" Left with nothing, I confessed everything. I kept the details brief, realizing I owed him the basic human decency of not wasting more of his time. The locked database and the massive corporate merger scheduled in under 11 hours. 4 top security firms had failed, and his old college research paper was my last hope. It was the exact encryption I desperately prayed he would recognize. I anxiously watched him take it in. He stayed silent so long that I actually started practicing the polite reply I'd use when he turned me away, the one that would seem composed and polite, completely masking how my entire life depended on his choice over the next 30 seconds. Finally, he murmured, "I really considered turning you away, you know." I nodded, understanding his anger. He asked, "So why aren't I?" I met his eyes directly and spoke the only real truth I had left. "Because your little girl is fast asleep in this apartment. And I know you wouldn't want her growing up believing that doing the right thing stops mattering the second it gets difficult." He slowly opened the door fully, whispering for me to come in and be quiet because his daughter was asleep. His warm apartment was everything that cold clinical HR file had missed. I saw the notebook on his desk, page after page covered in complex math equations. The crowded shelves along the wall were arranged by a quiet logic I couldn't grasp. A tiny, adorable pair of pink sneakers sat perfectly aligned next to his heavy work boots near the entrance. A toy rabbit named Scout sat on the coffee table, tilted, with one frayed ear facing outward. I looked quietly at that little toy, feeling a profound pang of regret before turning away. I dumped my laptop's server log files onto a drive, handing it over to him without a single word. My father sat at his worn workbench and opened the data. Then he went dead silent. The kind of stillness when a genius does what he is born for, no show. No corporate posturing. He was operating from a brilliance I had foolishly written off. I sank into the dusty spare chair and just watched my father. He recognized my complex network architecture in under 2 minutes. I saw it in his laser focus, in the subtle, authoritative shift of his posture. That quiet stillness of a brilliant man whose instincts were just confirmed by hard data. He did not brag, my father just kept reading. Minutes later, he muttered, eyes glued to the screen, timestamp seeded encryption. The master key is a specific date used as a seed. Whoever coded this used an academic framework detailed in a paper published in 2019. He paused. I know that paper. Another heavy silence. I co-authored it. I stayed silent. He finally looked up at me. The seed date is exactly what I need to break it. 3 weeks ago, inside your server room, I spotted a config file on the terminal right before your tech returned. The timestamp sitting in that file was March 14, 2021. He let that heavy, accusing silence hang there for a moment. You told me to leave before I could even finish. I wanted to beg for his forgiveness, but the words felt like they did not even exist. Or maybe I could not find them at 11:30 p.m., hours before my entire corporate empire collapsed. I stared down at the trembling, humiliated hands in my lap. I pictured my cold, sterile high-rise boardroom. And my board of directors, remembering when I decided this brilliant father was not worth my precious time. He could have easily submitted an anonymous tip online. He could have called the federal regulators on me. You and I both know he could have done nothing, letting my fragile corporate empire burn to the ground. But my father did absolutely none of those things. He simply went home to his little girl, keeping the breach quiet because my empire was no longer his problem. Yet here he was, hunched over his desk at midnight, decrypting my private data just because I showed up at his door with absolutely nothing to offer him but the raw truth of how desperate my situation really was. He rebuilt that entire decryption algorithm straight from memory, coding it fast and clean in a language that flowed effortlessly under his fingers, and my servers began processing. The small dusty room stayed dead silent while it ran. Somewhere in that heavy silence I blurted out, "Why did you leave finance?" He never looked up from the screen. "Something much more important came up," he muttered. I swallowed the obvious follow-up question, quietly asking about his rabbit's name instead. He told me the whole story, Claire, the naming process, and what a good scout does. I stayed completely quiet after that. The dusty clock read 1:17 a.m. when the screen finally came to life. The encrypted files unlocked one by one until the massive transaction history flooded his screen. 3 years of records, every single entry, timestamp, and hidden account routing code. My father scanned through the first 20 lines without breathing a word. Then he slowly set down his notepad and whispered, "You need to call your attorney right now." I leaned in and saw it. You know that crushing clarity when you cannot outrun the truth anymore? That devastating realization of what I had thrown away finally broke me. Exactly what I was looking at. The missing fortune that had been hidden deep inside that accounting anomaly wasn't 400,000. It was $47 million moved across 31 months through a clever sequence of corporate transfers, kept small enough to disappear within our massive daily transaction volume. Each transaction slipped right under the automatic flagging threshold. Each timed with our busiest quarters, when my corporate focus was stretched dangerously thin. All of it quietly routed to a shell company buried in the Cayman Islands. Every single fraudulent transaction authorized by the same digital signature, Xavier Monroe. I sat with that staggering number staring at his name, feeling that cold clarity that only comes when you discard those who matter. Realizing the shiny corporate life I chose over my father was a total lie. 3 years. Every board meeting, every executive strategy call. Every single morning my partner walked in with smooth answers to my toughest questions. I didn't cry. The same pride that made me cut off my dad wouldn't let me. I stared blankly at the wall, realizing the brutal cost of my choices, and quietly braced my heart. We finally cornered him in the Western Capitol lobby. At exactly 5:42 in the morning, just as he strolled through the doors. Holding his coffee, his expensive leather portfolio, and that sickeningly calm composure. the arrogant ease of a partner I valued more than my own flesh and blood. I stood waiting with my lead corporate attorney and 2 federal agents who had rushed over from the field office after my devastating call at 2:15 a.m., sending the complete digital evidence package right along with it. Xavier noticed us right before reaching the elevators. He froze completely. He locked eyes with me, wearing an expression I had never once seen on him. Not panic or guilt, just a rapid recalculation behind eyes that spent 43 years mastering the art of staying unreadable in tense rooms. He tried his first move, which was a perfectly calm, calculated denial. He listed complex accounting methodologies and interpretive frameworks, claiming there were simple explanations my IT team missed because they didn't grasp his complex financial system. My attorney simply dropped the printed transaction log onto the lobby table between us. 31 months, $47 million, 31 transfer authorizations, each carrying his personal digital signature quietly routed to that same offshore account. No corporate framework could explain that. Xavier stared at me before the federal agents finally stepped in. "I was keeping this entire company alive," he muttered. "You just don't have the ruthless experience to understand what that actually required." I didn't even answer. I just nodded, watching Xavier Monroe get escorted through the glass doors into the cold morning. And the hollow corporate world I chose felt incredibly, deafeningly quiet. My attorney was already on his phone, smoothly planning our next legal move. Diana quietly stepped out from a nearby corridor. She always had a way of appearing when my perfect world cracked, standing there without saying a single word. Through the glass doors, the street outside was finally starting to lighten, taking on that specific cold gray-blue shade the city always gets right before the dawn. I stood there, suddenly craving the simple honesty of my father, whom I had so foolishly discarded. I only realized the crushing weight of my pride after I stopped pushing people away. For 2 years, I was completely blind to how fragile my success was, having cast aside the people who actually mattered. The corrupt ally I trusted above everyone was secretly tearing down the foundation I took completely for granted. And the quiet mechanic I bluntly cast aside as useless had spotted the cracks 3 weeks before it all came crashing down. At 9 that morning, instead of celebrating my hollow success, I forced an emergency board meeting. I walked in entirely alone without my traitorous partner to finally expose the devastating truth I had refused to see. The system flaws, the altered logs, the architecture, and the $47 million. The criminal partner I trusted, and the federal investigation closing in. And simply because of that, somewhere between 2 in the morning and dawn, I knew I was absolutely done building my empire on lies and discarding the honest people. I confessed about the mechanic I had cast out, his ignored warning, and the blinding arrogance that stopped me from listening. I confessed my failures directly, refusing to hide behind any empty excuses. I admitted everything in front of 12 board members and both Harland Group executives who arrived expecting a massive victory lap, only to find a total reckoning instead. The entire boardroom fell completely silent. Miraculously, their lead representative praised my transparency, and the merger stayed alive. The final signing was delayed by 1 month to allow a thorough external forensic audit of our entire transaction history. It was a complete miracle for a disaster that felt entirely hopeless an hour ago. When the exhausting session ended and the room began to empty, one senior board member pulled me aside in the hallway. The same man who mocked me weeks ago now wanted to know about the genius technician I had discarded. I searched for him that afternoon, finding him near the north doors, working on an electrical panel in the corridor, toolbox open, giving his quiet attention to the work. The man whose true value I had ignored. His little girl Arya sat on the floor, backpack unzipped, drawing in a notebook, working on homework, or sketching one of those creative drawings she loved sharing with her dad. With her toy rabbit in her lap, I swallowed my pride and finally approached them. No corporate audience, no attorneys, no board members, absolutely nobody left to impress. Just the quiet lobby, the soft light, and the 3 of us. I knelt to her eye level, looked at her holding that toy rabbit, and said, "I owe you a huge apology. The last time I saw your father, I was extremely unkind and I was totally wrong about him. Arya processed my words, offering that deep, serious focus that children reserve for truly important moments. Then she picked up Scout and offered the rabbit to me with both hands. A pure, honest offering, far more valuable than any corporate deal I had ever negotiated. "You can hold Scout if you like," little Arya whispered. "He always helps when you are sad." I gently took the worn rabbit. Pressing it to my chest, the heavy knot of pride and regret I carried since dawn finally broke open. And I finally just let go. When I stood, I looked at Liam, who had silently watched everything unfold without a word. I simply said, "I want to offer you the job as our director of algorithmic risk. Name your own terms." He watched her, silent and steady, before gently shaking his head. No bitter smirk, no drama, just a quiet, honest refusal. "Thank you," he said softly, "but no," she froze. "I am building something of my own," he said, "and I am almost done." It finally clicked for the CEO. She once dismissed him as useless, but this was no cheap game to get her attention. He was simply a grounded, capable man who knew exactly what he was doing. Building in the shadows for 2 years, never needing her elite world to validate him. Giselle slowly handed the rabbit back to Arya. The little girl cradled the bunny in her lap, treating it with the kind of pure, gentle care her sister had long forgotten. Swallowing her pride, Giselle pleaded, "If you ever need a first client for your launch, please call me first, before anyone else." Liam just looked at her. A subtle warmth softened his expression, not a proud smile, but the quiet beginning of one. "I will think about it," he murmured. "Let us leave the corporate noise behind." That evening he made simple pasta. Dinners like this did not care about broken CEO pride. Arya sat on the counter, talking about the sad, wealthy lady from the glass towers who had held her bunny and wept silently, and how she finally seemed to breathe again. Liam stirred the sauce, whispering a quiet agreement. He knew her regrets all too well. Arya kicked her legs against the cabinets, wondering if her bunny found anything hidden today. How that little creature always managed to uncover buried truths. Liam turned from the stove, looking down into his daughter's wide, honest eyes. Taking in her serious face and the rabbit in her arms, he gently said yes. The bunny had indeed dug up something valuable today, a truth buried deep for years. Arya seemed completely satisfied with this. She watched him plate the food, loudly announcing she was starving. Then she asked to watch a documentary about deep-sea fish after dinner. Those creatures thriving in the deepest dark, creating their own unique light instead of waiting for rescue from above. He smiled and softly agreed. He agreed with that same steady devotion he showed every day, promising to always be there. Simply, completely, and without fail. Once she was asleep, he sat down and opened his laptop to his platform. It was the same quiet work that had waited for him for 2 years. A complex software system built in the late hours after his daughter slept. Just piece by careful piece. You and I recognize this quiet grind, a foundation built without wealthy boards, answering only to a father who knew his own worth. The glowing logo in the corner was clean and simple, Ashford Analytics. He worked silently for hours. Then he saved his work. Shutting the laptop, he sat in the quiet. But tonight, the empty room felt different than it had just yesterday. Not necessarily better and not lighter. Just different. That sudden release when a heavy emotional barrier finally shifts into a brand new place. You realize you carried that pride so long you forgot how to live with open hands. The next morning, before the CEO could even finish her first black coffee, a message arrived from an unknown sender outside her elite circle. No subject, just a single sentence waiting, poised to change everything for them. Scout is safely back with his true owner. Have a good morning. Giselle stared at the words, reading them twice. Her coffee cup hit the mahogany desk. Outside her glass walls, the corporate machine was already racing. It always did by 8. Fast, loud, and completely blind to the breaking hearts of the people trapped inside. But the powerful chief executive simply sat at her desk in the absolute silence of her office, smiling before the daily grind began. It was a soft, vulnerable smile she had not managed in a very long time. But you and I know that quiet mechanic never needed her validation. He knew his own worth the day he walked out of her boardroom, holding his daughter's hand, his shoulders squared with quiet dignity. He held on to that steady truth during those 3 weeks. He stayed completely silent about the heartbreak he witnessed, simply because it was not his story. He proved it past midnight, leaving his own world to open her digital files. He did the heavy lifting because her life was shattering, and he could fix it. Some dirty secrets stay buried deep inside 31 months of carefully routed bank transfers hidden in a corporate maze, only one document ever. Fully exposed, they foolishly assumed that humble mechanic in his blue uniform was just there to turn a wrench on command, with absolutely nothing else to offer her wealthy world. But as Scout gently taught Arya, and Arya unknowingly grounded Liam, and as he silently showed Giselle how to actually trust someone, without ever realizing he was saving her. You and I know that the things most worth finding are never hidden forever. They are just waiting for a real connection, looking at the exact right moment, in the right direction, refusing to walk away before the story is fully written.